Hello and welcome to the Farming Week, the podcast from Agriland that keeps you up to date with all the latest in Irish agriculture. I'm Charles O'Donnell and I'm joined by Aisling O'Brien and Rubina Freiberg. We'll start this week with some positive news, at least for farmers in the suckler beef sector. And that is that the 2024 Beef Welfare Scheme, which was announced last month, is now open for applications. Aisling, can you take us through the announcement from Minister Charlie McConalogue today and maybe take us through the details of the scheme as well?
Yes, Charles. So we previously spoke here on the podcast about this €20 million scheme for suckler farmers, which the minister announced in recent weeks. But just a quick refresher on it. So this scheme is going to support farmers in meal feeding suckler calves before and after weaning and in vaccinating against clostridial diseases and or calf pneumonia. Now, the meal feeding action will be paid at a rate of €35 per eligible calf, and the vaccination measure would be paid at a rate of €15 per eligible calf. And there is a ceiling of up to 40 calves on this scheme. So farmers who select and complete both of those actions will be paid €50 per calf, up to a maximum overall payment of €2,000. And all suckler farmers who have eligible calves born on their farms between July 1st of last year and July 30th of this year are eligible to apply. So if you want to get involved, applications have to be lodged through the Ag-Food portal. And there is a closing date here, Charles, of September 24th. And that is a date to pay attention to because the department said there is no facility for late applications with this scheme. And that is in order that payments to participants who have passed all the necessary validation checks can begin then in December of this year. So it is important to make sure that you have your application in before September 24th. Now, under the scheme's terms and conditions, the meal feeding action is mandatory for all participants, and farmers have to indicate when they're applying if they want to be considered for payment for completing the vaccination action. And farmers will have the option, when they apply, to select a lower number of animals for the vaccination action than for the meal feeding action if they want to do that. And participants in the scheme who opt to select vaccination at the application stage can vaccinate for one or both diseases, depending on the health status of their herds, but they will still only be paid €15 per eligible calf on that. And farmers who take part in the Beef Welfare Scheme, as well as SCEP, which of course is the Suckler Carbon Efficiency Programme, will be eligible to earn €200 per cow-calf pair for the first 22 pairs. Now, participants are being reminded to retain copies of the receipts for the meal feeding and for vaccination if they select that action as well. That is important to be able to verify those actions with the department as well. So look, it is a positive for suckler farmers to see this scheme coming through, Charles. I know that last year there was some controversy about IBR being included, in the scheme. But look, there is an option there, a flexibility when it comes to the vaccination measure, if that's what farmers want to get involved in. So as we said, a payment of up to €50 if you complete both of those actions, and a maximum payment available of €2,000 for up to 40 calves. So look, it is positive. It's a shot in the arm for the sector. We're waiting to hear what the farm organisations have to say about it. I know that they weren't happy about a cap being placed on the number of eligible calves, but I suppose some money is better than no money.
Absolutely, Aisling. Well, that's not the only measure the Minister has announced in recent days. Aisling, you have an update for us on the National Bovine Genotyping Programme.
Yeah, so the genotyping programme has reopened to new applicants this week, Charles, on Tuesday to be precise. That scheme first opened in May of 2023, and to date, over 10,600 herds have participated, and over 1.3 million animals have been genotyped to date. Last year, there was over 700,000 breeding animals from both dairy and beef herds genotyped, and to date this year, over 628,000 calves have been genotyped. So the reopening of the programme on Tuesday, it is open again to both beef and dairy herd owners. It's aimed at maximising the number of animals genotyped under the current cost-sharing model, which is between the department, the industry and farmers as well. And it is going to be continued to be administered by the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation, the ICBF, And you can make applications for the genotyping program through its website as well. And Minister McConalogue said he was delighted to extend what he termed as a world first initiative to more farmers out there. And he said that the response to the program has been very encouraging so far. And by increasing participation, we're taking another significant step, he said, towards reaching his ambition of genotyping the entire national cattle herd. So it's a big step forward, and it is a very ambitious program as well. And look, we do see that genotyped weanlings and store cattle, they are being traded through the marts. They have their CBV, their commercial beef value, displayed on mart screens. Breffney, our beef technical specialist here in Agriland, has been reporting on that as well. So, it is playing its part as well. And it is, I suppose, getting involved in breeding decisions as well on farms too, Charles. So if it is something that you're interested in, you can check it out on the ICBF website.
And just while we're on announcements from Minister McConalogue, he has also announced the opening for applications of the €40 million biomethane capital grant. That's a scheme to assist in the development of the biomethane sector as part of the National Biomethane Strategy that was announced in late May. Moving on to dairy news now, and we're approaching that time of the month where dairy processors will be announcing their milk prices for the previous month, so for July milk supplies in this case. Aisling, looking ahead to that, what kind of prices are being sought by farmers and what can they expect based on current trends?
Well, the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association Dairy Committee Chair Noel Murphy this week called on processors to increase their base price for July milk to 45 cents a litre. He said that milk purchasers and co-ops are obliged to keep up with the current market movements and that level of 45 cents a litre, in his mind, is very achievable on those parameters. He said that July has been a positive month from a spot price perspective, with the average return from both butter or skimmed milk powder and whole milk powder over 45 cents a litre after processing costs are deducted. Now, he said that since the middle of May, the gross return of butter or skim milk powder in the Dutch dairy quotes had been above 51 cents a litre before processing costs were taken into account. And he said that base milk price has seen a significant improvement in the month of May, with all co-ops barring two increasing their price from April. Now, he called on co-op boards to look very hard at the figures, both the income and the outgoings confronting their farmer suppliers, and to ask the question, can they really afford not to increase milk price when the market shows that increase is merited? And he said that boards have to understand that we're well past temporary difficulties at this stage. We're deep into the space where more and more dairy farmers are considering either drastic stock and volume reduction or even exiting the sector altogether. And he said that cash flow, and that's something that we've spoken about here on the podcast, Charles, has never been as tight out there, and the situation will only worsen in the coming months if input usage remains high. So, it is something that he feels is justified, that 45 cents a litre base price mark for July supplies. And look, we did report this week that the average global dairy trade price index rose. That's the GDT, of course, that rose just marginally, 0.5% following this week's auction. Of course, that auction held twice every month, and it's closely watched as a good indicator of global demand for core dairy products. And it accounts for buyers and sellers of dairy ingredients from over 70 countries. And the previous auction also recorded a slight increase. So that's two slight increases on the bounce. But it has to be put into the perspective that on July 2nd, the index fell by almost 7%. So there was quite a stark drop in it back then. And I suppose closer to home, the Ornua Purchase Price Index, that's the PPI for July. We got news this week that it's unchanged from June, although the indicative price return has decreased slightly. So the PPI for last month is 140.8, same as June. But Ornua said that it implies an indicative return of 41.1 cents a litre. And that is a decrease of 0.4 cents a litre from the June figure. And that figure was arrived at after deducting Ornua's member co-op processing costs, which are around 9 cents a litre for the month of July. And just staying with the figures briefly, Charles, it's something that we have kept an eye on as well over the course of this year, is the decrease in domestic milk intake. And just staying with the figures for a second, Charles, and something that we have been keeping a very close eye on here on Agriland is domestic milk intake. And we did see the latest figures from the Central Statistics Office this week, which estimated that June intake by milk processors and co-ops stood at just over 1 billion litres, which is actually down 13.3 million litres when compared with June 2023. And it actually is a drop of 25.4 million litres when compared with June 2022. So, that is a stark reminder of what's happening out there on the ground as well, Charles, in terms of volumes being collected as well.
And Aisling, we also heard from the National Milk Agency this week. They've released their annual report. What information did that contain?
Yeah, some pretty stark findings in terms of the number of liquid milk producers in this country, Charles, in the annual report for 2023, because they've said that number has fallen actually by 37% or 688 farmers in the past decade. And their annual report reveals that the number of registered milk supply contracts in the 2022-23 year decreased to 1,228. That's down 58 contracts or 5% on the previous year. And in the current milk year, a further 49 producers have exited, bringing the total number now of registered liquid milk producers in this country to 1,179. And actually, since the establishment of the National Milk Agency, the number of registered contracts has reduced by a startling 65%. From 3,344 back in 1995. So we did hear from Dennis Murphy, the chair of the National Milk Agency, in that report. In its forward, he said that the agency is very concerned by the continuing decline in the number of liquid milk producers out there and in their annual milk supplies as well. And he said that many traditional long-term registered producers are exiting fresh milk supply and are not being replaced in this sector. And he said that many suppliers are reviewing the economic benefit of producing all year round supplies of milk for the domestic fresh milk market. And he said that the agency is also worried about the impact of nitrates changes on this sector as well. He said that stocking rates per hectare are a key driver of profitability in Ireland's pasture-based system of milk production. And he said, given the reduction in stocking rates under the nitrates derogation, many registered liquid milk producers are now reviewing the sustainability of the all year round milk supply business model. And he also pointed to issues of succession, lifestyle changes, and labour availability as well, that are further factors which are compounding these decisions for liquid milk suppliers to leave this sector as well. And, it is a big sector in some ways. Obviously, about 90% of the milk produced in this country is exported out, and we do have a fresh milk market, though it is estimated to have a retail value of about €664 million last year. And actually, national consumption of fresh milk in 2023 was 572 million litres, which is actually up 5 million litres or 1% on the previous year. And Irish consumers actually have one of the highest annual per capita consumptions of fresh milk in the world at 112 litres. And the annual report noted that the market share, unfortunately, for domestic producers and processors declined to 71% in 2023, a role of exports in there as well. So, very stark figures there for the liquid milk industry, and something that'll have to be looked at into the future. And, I suppose Dennis Murphy did note as well that increased incentives from processors will have a role to play in keeping people in the sector as well, because, there is maybe an easier life some people might find in going back to maybe the more conventional rather than all year round milk supply arrangement.
Well, as we progress through the summer towards the back half of the year, one issue that continues to pop up and likely will continue to pop up is fodder. Specifically, the possibility of shortages over the winter period when animals are housed. Aisling, this week we saw Teagasc coming out and advising farmers to take some steps now and in the coming weeks to ensure they have enough fodder going forward. What has Teagasc said about this?
Yes, Charles. So as we've already discussed here on the podcast, the National Fodder and Food Security Committee met in early July, and it was told then that up to 30% of farms had fodder deficits of more than 10% for the coming winter. Now, we are hearing that the warmer weather has improved grass growth in many areas, and farmers are, I'm imagining, focused very much on second cut silage at the moment. Some of them have it completed, some are underway, and some are planning to start shortly on it. So this week, as you said, Teagasc has advised farmers to again have a look at their fodder stocks for the coming winter. And Teagasc are going to be carrying out another national fodder survey over the coming weeks, and we expect to get the results from that at the next fodder committee meeting. So as we know, the weather has impacted on grass growth this year, leaving it below normal levels, and figures from Pasture Base Ireland to the end of July show that growth continues to track at approximately 890 kilograms of grass dry matter per hectare. That's 11% behind the average grass growth to date in the previous 5 years. So Teagasc has said that silage areas and yields are back. There's been less opportunity for surplus grazing covers to be cut as silage because they've been needed in the rotation. And a lot of farmers, would have used any fodder reserves from last year as well to make sure that stock could be fed when the growth rates were so poor earlier in the year. So as before, Charles, the advice is do a fodder budget, assess those fodder stocks compared to the requirements for the winter period. And the reality is that many farmers are now looking at implementing a 7-month housing period based on last winter. And that's something that Minister Charlie McConalogue said as well. It's something that we will have to factor in going forward. So essentially, farmers are being told to assess your winter feed demand based on how many animals you intend to keep for the winter period. The amount of silage needed will be influenced, of course, by the type and the age of the animals that you're going to carry through the winter. And if you search fodder budget on Agriland, we have some guides there to help you work out how many bales or tons of silage are needed. So if you have any gap in your fodder requirement for the winter, Teagasc are saying to take a look at your options now. Of course, some of those options are going to be dependent on the weather being kind in the back end of the year. But for now, use up any remaining nitrogen and phosphorus allowances, increase growth on those grazing ground areas, and maybe take out surplus bales. Look at that third cut of silage if it's a possibility. Perhaps look at sourcing silage or forage crops from elsewhere. Could you maybe grow some forage crops on your farm if it's not too late to get out there and plant? Take a look at any animals that you were looking at maybe getting rid of before the winter, like maybe cull cows. Could that be done a little bit earlier in the year? That could maybe help cash flow issues out there as well. And speaking of cash flow, do a cash flow budget as well. Seek financial advice early where you need it for any additional feed purchases too. And look, have a chat with your advisor, or maybe a neighbor, Charles, and have a, look through the figures and see if it's something that you need to take action on now. And to look at your fertilizer application on grazing paddocks and silage ground, take the best advantage of any growth conditions that are out there as well. And, have a look at your fertilizer allowances. That is very important as well. I know that there has been a lot of confusion about that out there as well as things stand. And, look at what you have left to use and to get that out there and to use it if possible at the moment. It is something that is a real cause for concern for some farmers at the moment. Other farmers say that they will be okay once their second cut is done. But it is something that, you're always better to be looking at it than for it, as our colleague Breffney O'Brien wisely says. So, do sit down, have a look at the moment. How many bales do you have in the yard? How much have you got in the pit? And what are you looking to keep through the winter? And just do the sums on that. I don't need to tell farmers this. They know it well, for Charles, but it is just a timely reminder again, just to make sure that you will be okay for this upcoming winter as much as possible.
Yeah, that's worth pointing out, Aisling, for sure. No doubt about it. Well, moving on now, and concerns have been raised again this week over the residential zoned land tax that is due to come into effect next year with the aim to increase housing supply. There are concerns that it could affect active farmland around the country. Rubina, you have the latest on this.
There have been renewed calls this week for farmland to be exempt from the RZLT. The National Farm Business Chair of the Irish Farmers Association, Bill O'Keefe, has again called on Minister for Finance Jack Chambers to announce before Budget 2025 on the 1st of October that actively farmed land will be exempt from the tax. Now, the annual tax will apply from 2025 at a rate of 3% of the land's market value and is aimed at increasing housing supply by activating zoned and serviced residential development lands, including mixed-use lands for housing. I spoke to Bill O'Keefe and he said that a significant amount of farmland in almost every county could fall within the scope of the tax and that some farmers aren't even aware that they are within the scope of the tax yet. Now, it has to be noted that the total amount of agricultural land currently zoned appears to be unclarified. As reported by Agriland last week, RZLT maps published by the local authorities, which identify land within the scope of the tax, do not provide an indication of the current land use, which means they do not show whether or not land zoned is in agricultural use.
And Rubina, have government departments been able to clarify the amount of farmland which could be affected by the tax?
So we have asked the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, the Department of Finance and the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine to clarify how much farmland is currently zoned under the RZLT. Both the Department of Finance and the Department of Agriculture said that this is a matter for the Department of Housing, which has responsibility for the local authorities. Now, the Department of Housing told Agriland that the annual draft and final RZLT maps published by local authorities identify land that is zoned for either residential purposes or for mixed use, including residential purposes, based on the zonings included within city and or county development plans and local area plans. However, neither the RZLT maps nor the development plans or the local area plans provide an indication of the current use of the land in question, so whether or not it is in agricultural use or any particular existing use. So the RZLT was introduced in the Finance Act 2021, and the Department of Finance said that the tax is kept under review as part of the annual budget and the finance bill cycle, and that it regularly engages with both the Department of Housing and the Department of Agriculture on the RZLT. It is also worth mentioning that back in 2023, former Minister for Finance Michael McGrath already confirmed that land which is actively used for farming and is integral to the use of adjoining lands for farming is excluded from the RZLT. However, O'Keefe, the IFA's National Farm Business Chair, said that the current situation with the uncertainty that's there is causing unnecessary stress and huge worry among many farm families throughout the country. He also said that he receives calls every week from people across the country who have applied to the local authorities to have their land dezoned. Now, submissions and rezoning requests made by landowners will be considered by local authorities before the annual final map will be published on the 31st of January 2025. And this final map will then identify the land liable to the tax on the 1st of February 2025.
Thanks, Rubina. We're going to move on now and talk about an aspect of farm safety that perhaps is not highlighted to the same degree as, say, machinery and livestock handling. While the sun may not be exactly splitting the stones these days, farming is nonetheless a predominantly outdoor job, and exposure to sunlight for extended periods, even if it's not necessarily very hot out, brings with it the risk of skin cancer. Aisling, we got an idea this week of just how high that risk can be.
Yes, Charles. So skin cancer is the most common type of cancer in Ireland. There are over 13,000 new cases diagnosed every year, which is in or around the population of Castlebar in County Mayo every single year. So it just shows how many cases are diagnosed. And it's actually expected that that number would double by 2040. 9 out of 10 of those cases are caused by UV rays from the sun or from sunbeds. And recent statistics actually revealed that 23% of skin cancer related deaths in Ireland occur among farmers, construction workers, and those who work outside as well. Now, we recently caught up with Kevin O'Hagan. He's the Cancer Prevention Manager with the Irish Cancer Society. And he said it's wrong actually to presume that the sun is less damaging in this country. And he said that the most important way farmers can protect their skin from the sun is to be prepared throughout the season, because as we know, the weather can change very, very quickly out there. And the problem, he said, with skin cancers is that they come in all different shapes and sizes. And he advised anybody who's concerned to talk to their doctor if they notice anything, any change in their skin at all, even if it's not painful. And we have a lot of details on Agriland Agriland about maybe some of the common red flags when it comes to skin cancer. But the good news is that it's a very treatable type of cancer, but it has to be caught early, Charles. So that is why Kevin stressed to keep an eye for any changes that are there. And we also got findings from new research carried out by the University of Galway this week that said that 55% of farmers actually only apply sunscreen once a day, according to a survey that they did amongst farmers. And about 2/3 of participants, some 63%, reported sunburn experiences as part of their average working year. And farmers were significantly more likely than construction workers to report being sunburned. And the leading author of that report from University of Galway, Dr. Victoria Hogan, said that the research indicates that there is room for improvement around protective behaviours towards sun exposure amongst outdoor workers. Now, there are something called the Sun Smart Steps, Charles, which we've outlined on Agriland, but briefly that is slipping on loose clothing and maybe a t-shirt with a collar on it as well. Put on that sunscreen, a minimum SPF of 30 or higher, and apply it about 20 minutes before you go outside. Put on a wide-brimmed hat as well. Seek shade if you can, if possible, between 11 and 3 when the sun's rays are at their strongest. Maybe plan a different job that doesn't need to be outdoors for the real high point of sunshine in the day. And then also put on wraparound sunglasses as well as a way to protect the delicate eye area. But it is something that we all need to, I suppose, take a lot more care around as well, Charles. Over 13,000 cases of skin cancer, as I said, diagnosed every year. And maybe it's just something that in this country we think, oh, it's a dull country. It's not the Mediterranean. So, we don't maybe need to take all the precautions that we do if we're over on a sun holiday. But as Kevin O'Hagan said, do take those precautions. And if you are concerned, definitely seek advice from your GP.
Yeah, well said, Aisling. The sun is the sun, I suppose. So it's, as you said, it's not really relevant, I suppose, what part of the world you happen to be in. It can still have an impact.
Definitely with our fair skin. That's for sure.
We're going to finish this week with some news that's somewhat related to the summer period, and that is to do with ice cream. Some interesting statistics out of the EU this week on ice cream exports, Aisling.
Yeah, we're the 5th highest among EU member states in terms of exporting ice cream to non-EU countries. Last year, EU countries sent 261 million kilograms of ice cream to non-EU countries. Some fact and some amount of ice cream as well, I tell you. So Eurostat published these figures and it said that the quantity of exports was actually up 5% on the previous year. France accounted for 1/5 of the total exports, and it was followed by the Netherlands and Germany and Italy, and then Ireland slots in after that as well. Now, the overall production of ice cream actually went down slightly in 2023 compared to the previous year. I wonder if that's anything to do with a drop back in milk collections, who knows? But Eurostat said that the EU produced 3.2 billion litres of ice cream last year, Germany being the main producer, 612 million litres they produced, followed by France and Italy. Of course, Italy, the home of that gorgeous gelato. So, and no production figures, unfortunately, for Ireland in those Eurostat figures. But it makes me want a 99, Charles. I don't know, whatever your tipple is.
Yeah, looking forward to the end of work today for sure.
Definitely.
That brings us to the end of this week's podcast. Just before we go, there's just time to tell you that the judge for this year's prestigious Diageo Bailey's Cow competition has been chosen. German farmer Markus Mock will judge competitors at the competition, which will take place at the Virginia show on August 21st. But that's where we'll leave it for today. Please don't forget to rate, review and follow The Farming Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love if you could spare some time to give us 5 stars and share The Farming Week with anyone you think might be interested. From Aisling, Rubina and myself, have a nice weekend.